The crack of the gavel echoed across the dusty auction yard, silencing the crowd of onlookers who had gathered under the merciless New Mexico sun to witness the sale that had all of Roswell talking. Olivia Byers stood on the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin, her once fine blue dress now sullied with the dirt of 3 days' travel. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the yard as he gestured toward her like she was nothing more than cattle. Next up, we have a woman of 22 years. Educated but damaged goods, gentlemen. Former teacher caught stealing from her employer back east, sent west as punishment, can read, write, and keep house. Bidding starts at $5. Olivia kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to meet the eyes of the men who studied her as one might examine a horse before purchase. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The year was 1878, and she had known that coming west would be difficult. But she hadn't expected this to be auctioned off as an indentured servant, her reputation in tatters due to lies and betrayal. The crowd murmured, a few snickers rising from the back. Someone called out, "What kind of damage we talking about, Harkins?" The auctioneer, a portly man with a handlebar mustache and beady eyes, gave a knowing smirk. "The kind that makes a woman unreliable, gentlemen, prone to thievery and deception. But she's got 10 years of servitude to work off her crimes, so you'll get your money's worth." $3, called a voice from the back. "4, shouted another. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, willing herself not to cry. She wasn't a thief. She had been framed by the school headmaster after rejecting his advances, but no one had believed her. Her word against his, and in Boston society, that meant she was already condemned. $5, came a steady voice from the edge of the crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose. $5 from Mr. Xavier. Do I hear 6? A heavy silence fell. Olivia finally looked down at the crowd, her eyes finding the source of the bid. He stood apart from the others, tall and lean, with broad shoulders and a stance that spoke of quiet confidence. His dark hat shaded his face, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, dusted with several days' worth of stubble. Unlike the others, he wasn't leering at her. Instead, he seemed to be assessing the situation with careful consideration. $6, called out a man Olivia recognized as the owner of the local saloon, his eyes glazed with drink even at this early hour. $7, countered the stranger without hesitation. The saloon keeper squinted at him. "What you want with damaged goods, Xavier? Ain't you got enough troubles with that ranch of yours?" The man Xavier didn't respond to the taunt, his attention fixed on the auctioneer, $7 going once. Harkins began, his gavel raised. $8, came another bid from a heavyset man with cruel eyes. 10, said Xavier, his voice still calm but with an edge of finality. A murmur ran through the crowd. $10 was more than most would pay for an indentured woman with a sullied reputation. The auctioneer looked around. $10 going once, twice. He slammed the gavel down. "Sold to Granger Xavier." Olivia felt her knees go weak with relief that she hadn't been purchased by the saloon keeper or the man with the cruel eyes, though she had no idea what fate awaited her with this Mr. Xavier. As the auctioneer's assistant untied her from the post, she was led down the steps to where her new owner waited. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a startling shade of green, set in a sun-weathered face that had seen its share of hardship. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, and there was something in his expression that didn't match the brutish demeanor of the other bidders. "Miss Byers," he said with a slight nod as the assistant handed him her papers. "Mr. Xavier," she replied stiffly, determined to maintain what dignity she had left. He studied her for a moment before turning to the auctioneer. "The bill of sale says she's damaged goods. I'll be the judge of that." His voice was low but firm, carrying a note of challenge. The auctioneer shrugged. "She's yours now, Xavier. Whatever damage you find ain't my problem anymore." Granger Xavier tucked the papers into his vest pocket and then, to Olivia's surprise, produced a small knife from his belt. She stiffened, instinctively stepping back, but he merely reached for her bound wrists and cut the rope with a single clean slice. No need for that anymore, he said quietly. My wagon's this way, confused by this unexpected act of, what kindness, decency. Olivia rubbed her chafed wrists and followed him across the dusty yard to where a wagon stood waiting, hitched to two sturdy horses. Unlike the fancy carriages she'd known in Boston, this was a practical, well-used vehicle built for the rugged terrain of the New Mexico territory. As they approached the wagon, a young boy of perhaps 12 hopped down from the driver's seat. "Did you get what you needed, Mr. Xavier?" he asked, his freckled face curious. "I did, Tommy," Granger replied. "This is Miss Byers. She'll be coming back to the ranch with us." The boy's eyes widened as he took in Olivia's disheveled appearance, but to his credit, he simply nodded and said, "Madam," with a small tip of his hat. "Tommy helps out at the ranch," Granger explained to Olivia. "He'll ride in the back. You can take the seat up front." Too numb to argue, Olivia allowed herself to be helped up onto the wooden bench. Granger climbed up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. As they pulled away from the auction yard, Olivia finally found her voice. "What exactly do you expect of me, Mr. Xavier?" He glanced at her, those green eyes unreadable. "For now, just to rest. You look like you haven't had a decent meal or sleep in days. And later," he returned his gaze to the road ahead. "Later, we'll talk about your situation and what brought you here. The auction had you marked as damaged goods. I think there's more to your story than that." Olivia stared at him, unable to reconcile this man with the brutal fate she had been preparing herself for. "Why did you buy me?" The corner of his mouth turned up slightly, not quite a smile. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in this world to recognize it when I see it standing on an auction block." As the wagon rolled out of Roswell and onto the open road, Olivia found herself studying Granger Xavier's profile, wondering what kind of man he really was and what awaited her at his ranch. For the first time in weeks, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her chest, not that she was saved exactly, but that perhaps her situation wasn't as dire as she had feared. Little did she know that the journey ahead would test them both in ways neither could imagine, and that the man sitting beside her would come to mean more to her than anyone she had ever known. The Xavier Ranch lay 15 miles outside of Roswell, nestled in a valley with the Sacramento Mountains rising majestically in the distance. As the wagon rumbled along the dusty trail, Olivia found herself taking in the stark beauty of the New Mexico landscape. It was nothing like the lush greenery of Massachusetts, but there was something hauntingly beautiful about the vast open spaces, the red gold earth, and the endless blue sky. "It's different from the East," Granger commented, noticing her gaze. "Yes," Olivia agreed, "it's larger somehow." "Less confined," he nodded. "That's why I came out here after the war. Couldn't stand feeling hemmed in anymore." "You fought in the war between the states?" she asked, curious despite her circumstances. "Union Army, joined up in '63 when I was 18, saw things no man should see." His expression darkened momentarily, then cleared. "But that's long past now." They fell into silence after that, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. In the back, Tommy had fallen asleep, lulled by the rhythm of the journey. After about an hour, they crested a small rise and Granger pointed ahead. "There it is, Xavier Ranch." Olivia leaned forward, taking in the spread before her. It wasn't what she had expected. Instead of a grand house with white columns like the plantations she'd read about, she saw a modest but well-built log home with a wide porch, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could make out figures moving about the property. "It's not much compared to Eastern standards," Granger said, misreading her silence, "but it's mine, free and clear. It looks solid," Olivia replied, unsure of what else to say. In truth, it looked more welcoming than anything she'd seen since leaving Boston. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her face was lined with years of sun and hard work, but her eyes were kind as she watched the wagon approach. "That's Mrs. Donnelly," Granger explained. She keeps house and makes sure we don't all starve to death. Her husband works the cattle with me." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Granger jumped down, coming around to help Olivia. She hesitated before taking his offered hand, still uncertain of his intentions despite his seemingly decent behavior thus far. "Mrs. Donnelly," Granger called as he assisted Olivia from the wagon. "This is Miss Olivia Byers. She'll be staying with us for a while." The older woman's eyes widened slightly as she took in Olivia's appearance, but her expression quickly shifted to one of motherly concern. "Land's sakes, child, you look like you've been through the ringer. Come inside and let's get you cleaned up and fed." Tommy had awakened and hopped down from the wagon. "I'll take care of the horses, Mr. Xavier," he offered, already moving to unhitch them. "Thanks, Tommy." Granger turned to Olivia. "Go with Mrs. Donnelly. She'll see to your needs. We'll talk more at supper." Olivia wanted to question him further, to understand exactly what her position was to be in this household. But Mrs. Donnelly was already ushering her toward the house with gentle insistence. "Don't you worry about a thing right now, Miss Byers," the older woman said softly as they climbed the porch steps. "Mr. Xavier is a good man, despite what rumors you might have heard in town. You're safe here." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace along one wall. The furnishings were simple but well made: a long table with benches, several sturdy chairs arranged near the hearth, and shelves lined with books that caught Olivia's attention immediately. "Mr. Xavier loves his books," Mrs. Donnelly commented, noticing Olivia's gaze. "Reads every night before bed, no matter how tired he is. Now, let me show you where you can wash up." She led Olivia to a small but clean bedroom off the main room. A single bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall, a washstand with a pitcher and basin against another, and a small chest of drawers completed the furnishings. "This will be your room," Mrs. Donnelly said. "I'll bring hot water for you to wash, and then you should rest. You look dead on your feet, if you don't mind my saying so." Olivia's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. After weeks of hardship and the degradation of the auction block, this simple kindness nearly undid her. "Thank you," she managed to say. Once alone, Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind whirling with questions and confusion. What was she doing here? What did Granger Xavier want with her? The fact that he had bought her, purchased her like property, couldn't be ignored, regardless of how decent he seemed. Mrs. Donnelly returned with a steaming pitcher of water, a cake of soap, and a clean towel. "I'll see if I can find you something else to wear," she said, eyeing Olivia's travel-worn dress. "We're not of a size, but I might have something that can be altered." After the older woman left, Olivia stripped off her filthy garments and washed herself as thoroughly as possible with the basin and cloth. The simple act of being clean again brought tears to her eyes. When she had finished, she found that Mrs. Donnelly had quietly left a nightgown and a plain cotton dress on the bed. Both were a bit large, but infinitely better than what she'd been wearing. Exhaustion overtook her as soon as she lay down on the bed. Despite her intention to remain alert and wary in this strange place, Olivia fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately. She awoke to the sound of voices and the smell of cooking food. Disoriented at first, it took her a moment to remember where she was. The light coming through the small window had changed, indicating that several hours had passed. Quickly, she dressed in the cotton dress Mrs. Donnelly had provided, ran her fingers through her tangled dark hair as best she could, and cautiously opened the bedroom door. The main room was now filled with people. Granger sat at the head of the table, with Tommy beside him. Mrs. Donnelly was placing a large pot of what smelled like stew in the center of the table, while a weathered man Olivia assumed was Mr. Donnelly carved a loaf of bread. Two other men, ranch hands by the look of them, sat on one of the benches, talking quietly. Granger was the first to notice her. "Miss Byers," he said, rising from his seat, "I hope you were able to rest." All eyes turned to her, and Olivia fought the urge to retreat back into the bedroom. "Yes, thank you," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "Come and join us for supper," Mrs. Donnelly said warmly, gesturing to an empty place on the bench. Olivia made her way to the table, acutely aware of the curious glances from the ranch hands. She sat down, keeping her eyes lowered. "Miss Byers, this is my foreman, Jim Donnelly," Granger said, indicating the older man. "And these are Pete and Cal who help with the cattle." Each man nodded respectfully as he was introduced, though Pete, a younger man with sandy hair, continued to stare at her with undisguised curiosity. "You already met Tommy, who helps with just about everything," Granger continued with a slight smile toward the boy, who beamed with pride. "It's nice to meet you all," Olivia said politely, though her mind was racing with questions about her role here. Once everyone was seated, Granger bowed his head briefly in a silent grace, and the others followed suit. Then the food began to be passed around, and for a few minutes, there was only the sound of eating and the occasional request to pass the bread or the salt. Olivia ate slowly, savoring the simple but delicious stew. It had been days since she'd had a proper meal, and she had to force herself not to bolt her food like a starving animal. As the meal progressed, the men began to talk about the day's work fences that needed mending, a missing calf that had been found, plans for moving part of the herd to better grazing land. It was all so normal, so ordinary, that Olivia found herself relaxing slightly despite her uncertain situation. After the meal, the ranch hands thanked Mrs. Donnelly and excused themselves. Mr. Donnelly lingered to help his wife clear the table, and Tommy was sent to his small room off the kitchen with instructions to complete some reading before bed. Finally, only Olivia and Granger remained at the table. He poured coffee for them both and then leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. "I imagine you have questions," he said at last. Olivia wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Several," she admitted. "Beginning with why you purchased my contract and what you expect of me here." He nodded, as if he'd anticipated this direct approach. "I purchased your contract because I needed help and because you looked like someone who'd been dealt a bad hand. As for what I expect..." He paused, considering his words. "I need a teacher for Tommy and some of the other children in the area. The nearest school is in Roswell, too far for daily travel. I've been teaching Tommy myself when I can, but with the ranch to run, I can't give him the education he deserves." Olivia blinked in surprise. "You want me to teach? According to your papers, you were a teacher back east, is that true?" "Yes," she said cautiously. "I taught at a girls' school in Boston for 3 years. Then that's what I want you to do here. Teach Tommy and whatever other children can make it to the ranch 3 days a week. The rest of the time, you can help Mrs. Donnelly with household matters if you're willing." Olivia stared at him, trying to process this unexpected turn. "But my contract, the auction..." Granger's expression hardened slightly. "I don't hold with indentured servitude, Miss Byers. That paper I bought says you owe 10 years of service for your crimes. I don't know what crimes you committed, and frankly, I don't much care, but I do need a teacher and you need a fresh start. I'm offering you a job with fair wages that will help you pay off that contract sooner rather than later." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" she asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer something for nothing. His green eyes met hers steadily. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Byers, even those the world has labeled as damaged goods." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "I didn't steal anything, Mr. Xavier. I was accused falsely by someone whose advances I rejected." Something flashed in Granger's eyes, anger but not directed at her. "I figured it was something like that. The world isn't kind to women who stand their ground." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Finally, Olivia spoke again. "If I accept your offer, what are the terms? Room and board here at the ranch. $5 a month in wages. 3 days a week teaching, 2 days helping with household tasks. Sundays free for your own pursuits. If at any point you wish to leave, you may do so, though I'd appreciate notice so I can find another teacher for Tommy." It was more generous than Olivia had dared hope for. With those wages, she could eventually save enough to pay off her contract and perhaps even return east, though the thought of facing Boston society again held little appeal. "What about my contract?" Legally, you own my services for 10 years. Granger's jaw tightened. I don't own anyone, Miss Byers. That paper means nothing to me except as protection for you. As long as you're under contract to me, no one else can claim you or force you into another arrangement. But between us, you're a free woman working for fair wages. Olivia studied him, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only straightforward honesty in his weathered face. Very well, Mr. Xavier, I accept your terms, he nodded, a hint of relief in his expression. Good, you can start teaching Tommy the day after tomorrow. Take tomorrow to rest and get your bearings. As he rose from the table, Olivia found herself asking, how did Tommy come to be in your care? Is he your son? A shadow passed over Granger's face. No, his parents were friends who died in a fever outbreak 2 years ago. I took him in rather than see him sent to an orphanage back east. That was kind of you. It wasn't kindness, it was the right thing to do. He hesitated, then added, Good night, Miss Byers. Mrs. Donnelly rises early, but you're welcome to sleep as late as you need tomorrow. With that, he left her sitting at the table, her mind whirling with the unexpected turn her life had taken. From the auction block to a teaching position in the span of a day, it seemed almost too good to be true. And in Olivia's experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. Yet as she sat alone in the warm kitchen, listening to the night sounds of the ranch settling around her, she couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just perhaps, her luck had finally changed. The next morning, Olivia awoke to the sound of activity in the main room. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and for a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back the auction, Granger Xavier's unexpected purchase of her contract, and his even more unexpected offer of employment. She dressed quickly in the borrowed cotton dress, wishing she had a comb for her tangled hair. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Mrs. Donnelly setting out breakfast on the table. Good morning, dear, the older woman greeted her warmly. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in weeks, Olivia admitted. Thank you for the clothes and the comfortable bed. You're very welcome. Mr. Xavier told me about your arrangement. I'm glad you'll be staying on as Tommy's teacher. That boy is sharp as a tack but needs proper schooling. Olivia accepted a cup of coffee gratefully. Where is everyone? The men have been up for hours, tending to the cattle. Tommy's out helping with the morning chores. They'll be in for breakfast soon enough. Mrs. Donnelly paused, studying Olivia with kind eyes. Mr. Xavier said I should take you to the storeroom after breakfast. We've got some trunks of clothes that might fit you with a bit of alteration. Can't have you teaching in borrowed dresses. That's very thoughtful, Olivia said, surprised once again by the consideration being shown to her. Mrs. Donnelly's expression softened. He's a good man, Mr. Xavier, despite what some in town might say. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair and decent to his core. Curiosity piqued, Olivia asked, What do they say about him in town? The older woman hesitated, then sighed. Some call him a recluse, others worse. There was trouble when he first came here after the war, a misunderstanding with some local men that turned violent. Mr. Xavier was cleared of any wrongdoing but mud sticks, especially in a small place like Roswell. Before Olivia could ask for more details, the door swung open, and Tommy burst in, followed by Granger and the ranch hands. The conversation shifted to breakfast and the day's tasks, but Olivia found herself watching Granger with renewed interest, wondering about the trouble Mrs. Donnelly had mentioned. After breakfast, while the men returned to their work, Mrs. Donnelly led Olivia to a small storeroom at the back of the house. Inside were several trunks and boxes, neatly stacked. These belonged to Mr. Xavier's sister, Mrs. Donnelly explained as she opened one of the trunks. She visited from back east a few years ago but passed away during her stay, influenza. Mr. Xavier couldn't bear to get rid of her things. Olivia felt a pang of sympathy for Granger as she looked at the carefully packed dresses, shawls, and petticoats. Are you sure he won't mind me using them? It was his suggestion, Mrs. Donnelly assured her, said they should be put to good use rather than gathering dust. The clothes were of good quality, not the height of fashion perhaps, but well made and practical. Most importantly, they were close to Olivia's size, needing only minor alterations. By midday, she had selected several dresses, undergarments, a shawl, and a sturdy pair of boots that fit her reasonably well. Mrs. Donnelly also showed her a small room off the main living area that Granger had designated as the schoolroom. It contained a desk, several benches, a blackboard, and a bookshelf filled with readers, primers, and a few well-worn textbooks. Mr. Xavier started collecting these as soon as Tommy came to live here, Mrs. Donnelly explained. He wrote to his contacts back east for proper schoolbooks. Said a boy needs more than just ranching skills to make his way in the world. Olivia ran her fingers along the spines of the books, impressed by the collection. He seems to value education highly. He does indeed. Educated himself through books after the war. Reads everything he can get his hands on. The rest of the day passed quickly as Olivia familiarized herself with the schoolroom, examined the books available, and began planning lessons for Tommy. Mrs. Donnelly mentioned that 3 children from a neighboring ranch might join the classes as well, once word spread that a proper teacher was available. It was late afternoon when Olivia decided to explore the ranch a bit. The air was cooler now, the relentless New Mexico sun beginning its descent toward the distant mountains. She walked around the main house, taking in the well-kept grounds, the vegetable garden behind the kitchen, and the various outbuildings that made up the ranch complex. As she approached the corral, she spotted Granger working with a young horse, a beautiful chestnut mare that seemed nervous and skittish. She watched as he moved slowly and deliberately around the animal, speaking in low tones that Olivia couldn't quite make out. His patience was evident, never forcing the horse, but allowing it to grow accustomed to his presence and touch at its own pace. There was something captivating about the scene, the powerful man moving with such gentleness, the gradual relaxing of the horse's tense posture. Olivia found herself leaning against the fence, entranced by the quiet interaction. She must have made some small sound, because suddenly Granger looked up, his green eyes finding her across the corral. For a moment, they simply regarded each other in silence. Then he gave the horse a final pat and made his way over to where she stood. "Enjoying your explorations, Miss Byers?" he asked, wiping his hands on a cloth he pulled from his pocket. "Yes, thank you. You have a beautiful ranch." She nodded toward the chestnut mare, who was now calmly grazing. "You have quite a way with horses." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "They're honest creatures, no pretense or deception. Treat them with respect and they'll do the same for you." "The same could be said for people, I suppose," Olivia ventured. "Some people," Granger corrected, a hint of hardness entering his voice. Then, as if regretting the tone, he added more lightly, "Did you find the schoolroom to your liking?" "Very much so. You have an impressive collection of books." "Knowledge is freedom," he said simply. "Something no one can take from you once you've got it. I want Tommy to have that freedom." Olivia studied him, struck by the conviction in his voice. Mrs. Donnelly mentioned that other children might join the classes. The Hendersons have 3 children on the next ranch over. They've been teaching them as best they can, but neither John nor Martha had much schooling themselves. He leaned against the fence beside her, looking out over his property. "There are other families scattered about who might send their children too once they know there's a real teacher available." "I'll do my best for them," Olivia promised. Granger turned to look at her directly, his expression serious. "I know you will. Despite what that auction paper says about you being damaged goods, I can see you're a woman of intelligence and character." Heat rose to Olivia's cheeks at both the compliment and the reminder of the humiliating auction. "Thank you for giving me this chance, Mr. Xavier." "Granger," he said suddenly. "Pardon, my name is Granger. Mr. Xavier was my father and we didn't part on good terms." "I'd prefer you call me by my given name, at least when it's just us talking like this." The request surprised her, indicating a level of familiarity she hadn't expected. "That seems rather informal for an employer and employee." A shadow of amusement crossed his face. "Miss Byers, we're in the New Mexico territory, not a Boston drawing room. Formality doesn't count for much out here." She couldn't help but smile at that. "Very well, Granger, then I suppose you should call me Olivia." "Olivia," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "It suits you." Their eyes met again, and Olivia felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach. There was something in Granger's gaze that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before, not as a proper Boston lady, nor as the damaged goods of the auction block, but simply as herself. The moment was broken by Tommy's voice calling from the direction of the house. "Mr. Xavier, Mrs. Donnelly says supper's nearly ready." Granger straightened up, breaking eye contact. "We'd better head back. Mrs. Donnelly doesn't take kindly to serving cold food." As they walked side by side toward the house, Olivia found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. He was an enigma, a rough-hewn rancher with the speech and reading habits of an educated man, someone who purchased an indentured woman only to offer her freedom and employment, a man who clearly had a past that had left its mark on him. Despite her resolve to remain cautious and guarded in this strange new situation, Olivia couldn't deny a growing curiosity about Granger Xavier and the troubling realization that his opinion of her mattered more than it should. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that Olivia found surprisingly comfortable. Each morning, she would rise early with the rest of the household, help Mrs. Donnelly prepare breakfast, and then spend the morning teaching Tommy. The Henderson children, Sarah, aged 10, James, 8, and little Emma, 6, joined them 3 days a week, arriving on horseback with their father, who would return to collect them in the afternoon. Olivia discovered that she genuinely enjoyed teaching again. The children were eager to learn, especially Tommy, who showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics and literature. The makeshift schoolroom became a haven of sorts, a place where Olivia could reclaim some of her former identity and purpose. In the afternoons, she would help Mrs. Donnelly with household tasks or work on altering the clothes from Granger's sister's trunk to better fit her. Occasionally, if the men were working near the house, she would bring them water or coffee, using these opportunities to observe Granger from a distance. He remained something of a mystery to her. During meals and the occasional evenings when they would all gather in the main room after supper, he was polite but reserved, speaking mostly of ranch business or asking Tommy about his lessons. Yet there were moments, a shared glance, a brief conversation as they passed each other in the yard, an unexpected smile when she said something that amused him that hinted at a deeper person beneath the stoic exterior. It was during one such evening, about a month after her arrival, that Olivia learned more about the trouble Mrs. Donnelly had alluded to earlier. Most of the household had already retired for the night, but Olivia had stayed up reading one of the books from the shelf, a collection of Emerson's essays that she had discovered with delight. Granger, too, had remained in the main room, going over some accounts at the table. The comfortable silence was broken when he suddenly asked, "What do you think of Emerson's views on self-reliance?" Startled, Olivia looked up to find him watching her with interest. "I find them compelling, if somewhat idealistic," she replied after a moment. "The idea that each person must find their own path rather than following convention is appealing, especially to someone who has seen the constraints of society up close." He nodded, seemingly pleased with her response. "You've read him before." "Yes, though it wasn't considered entirely appropriate reading for young ladies in Boston," she admitted with a small smile. "My father had a progressive view of female education, thankfully." "And what brought you from that progressive household to an auction block in New Mexico territory?" The question was direct, but his tone wasn't accusatory, merely curious. Olivia hesitated. She hadn't spoken of her circumstances to anyone at the ranch, and they had respectfully avoided asking. But something about the quiet evening and Granger's straightforward manner made her want to unburden herself. "My father died 3 years ago," she began, closing the book in her lap. "He was a professor of literature at Harvard, but he wasn't particularly skilled with financial matters. After his death, I discovered we were deeply in debt. I had to sell our home and most of our possessions to satisfy the creditors." Granger's expression remained attentive but neutral as she continued. "I had been educated well enough to teach, so I secured a position at the Blackwood Academy for young ladies. The headmaster, Mr. Richardson, seemed pleased with my work at first, but then he began, paying me particular attention. Her voice tightened. When I rejected his advances, he accused me of stealing funds from the school treasury. It was his word against mine, and as a respected member of Boston society, his word carried more weight. "And no one stood by you?" Granger asked quietly. Olivia shook her head. "My mother died when I was a child, and my father's colleagues distanced themselves when the accusations emerged. I had a few friends, but they were in no position to help. Mr. Richardson presented me with a choice: face public trial and likely imprisonment, or accept a contract of indentured service in the Western Territories." "No choice at all," Granger observed grimly. "Precisely. So I signed the contract, was transported west with a group of other criminals, and ended up on that auction block where you found me." She met his eyes directly. "I did not steal anything, Mr. Xavier Granger. I have never stolen anything in my life." "I believe you," he said simply. Those 3 words, spoken with such quiet conviction, nearly undid her. Olivia had to blink rapidly to keep tears at bay. "Thank you," she managed. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with shared understanding. After a moment, Granger spoke again. "I came to New Mexico after the war with ghosts of my own," he said, his voice low. "Bought this land, started building something I could be proud of, but the past has a way of following you, even across a continent." "The trouble Mrs. Donnelly mentioned," Olivia ventured. He looked momentarily surprised, then rueful. "Martha has a kind heart, but discretion isn't always her strongest quality." He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. 3 years after I settled here, a man named Curtis arrived in Roswell. He'd served in my regiment during the war, recognized me despite my attempts to keep to myself." Granger rose from his chair and moved to stand by the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. "There was an incident during the war, a civilian family killed during a raid. Curtis was responsible, but as his commanding officer, I was implicated. We were both cleared by a military tribunal, but the stain remained." "What happened when he recognized you?" He started spreading stories in town, embellished to make himself seem like a hero and me a villain. "I ignored it at first, but then he began threatening to harm Tommy, who I'd just taken in after his parents died." Granger's voice hardened. "One night, Curtis and 3 local men who'd believed his tales came out here, drunk and looking for trouble." He fell silent, and Olivia found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to continue. "There was a fight. Curtis pulled a gun. In the struggle, he was shot with his own weapon." Granger turned to face her, his expression carefully controlled. "I was cleared of any wrongdoing self-defense, but mud sticks, as Mrs. Donnelly would say. Some in town still see me as a killer, a dangerous man best avoided." "Is that why you rarely go into Roswell?" Olivia asked softly. He nodded. "Easier to send Jim or Pete for supplies than deal with the whispers and stares. It's also why I was surprised at the auction that day, hadn't planned to go into town at all. But Jim heard they were selling off indentures, and we've been needing a teacher for Tommy." "So you came and bought a woman's sight unseen, marked as damaged goods," Olivia said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice despite her growing regard for him. Granger looked at her directly, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I saw a woman being humiliated and misjudged by people who knew nothing about her. Reminded me of someone else I know." The parallel wasn't lost on Olivia, both of them judged and found wanting by society based on false accusations, both carrying labels that didn't reflect their true character. "We're quite the pair, aren't we?" she said with a small, sad smile. "The dangerous recluse and the damaged goods." To her surprise, Granger chuckled, a warm, genuine sound she'd rarely heard from him. "When you put it that way, it's almost amusing." "Almost," she agreed, finding herself smiling in return. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You know, Olivia, I've not once regretted my impulsive decision at that auction. Whatever your past, you've been nothing but an asset to this household. Tommy adores you, the Henderson children are learning more than they ever have, and even Jim admits the place feels more civilized with you here." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "Thank you." I've found more peace here than I expected possible after everything that happened." Granger nodded, then glanced at the clock on the mantel. "It's late. We should both get some rest." As Olivia rose to retire to her room, Granger spoke again, his voice quieter. "For what it's worth, I've never seen you as damaged goods, not from the first moment at that auction block." She paused at her doorway, looking back at him. "What did you see?" A hint of vulnerability crossed his usually guarded features. "Someone worth saving, someone who might understand what it means to start over." With that, he bid her good night and turned away, leaving Olivia standing in her doorway with a strange fluttering in her chest and the sense that something significant had shifted between them. As spring gave way to early summer, the days grew longer and hotter in the New Mexico territory. The ranch bustled with activity as the cattle were moved to higher pastures. Repairs were made to fences and outbuildings, and the vegetable garden began producing an abundance of fresh food. Olivia found herself increasingly integrated into the rhythm of ranch life. The children were making excellent progress in their studies, Tommy especially showing an aptitude that made her suspect he might someday pursue higher education if given the opportunity. Mrs. Donnelly had taught her to make soap from scratch and preserve vegetables for the winter, skills she'd never imagined needing in her Boston life, but now found satisfying. Most surprising to her, however, was the gradual change in her relationship with Granger. Since their late-night conversation about their respective pasts, a new ease had developed between them. He would often join her in the schoolroom after the children had left, asking about their progress or discussing books they had both read. Sometimes in the evenings, they would sit on the porch as the sun set, talking about everything from philosophy to the daily challenges of ranch life. Olivia became aware of a growing attraction to him that went beyond gratitude or mere friendship. She found herself noticing things about him she hadn't before: the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength of his hands as he worked with the horses, the deep timbre of his voice when he read aloud to Tommy in the evenings. Whether he felt anything similar for her, she couldn't be certain. There were moments a lingering glance, a hand offered to help her down from the wagon that held on just a fraction too long, a compliment that seemed to carry more weight than casual conversation required, but Granger was too reserved, too careful for her to be sure. One sweltering afternoon in late June, as Olivia was hanging laundry to dry behind the house, she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw Granger and Jim Donnelly riding in from the northern pasture at a faster pace than usual. Something about their urgency made her pause, the damp sheet she was holding forgotten in her hands. As they dismounted by the barn, she could see them talking intently, Jim gesturing toward the distant mountains. Granger's expression was grim as he nodded and then headed toward the house. Olivia met him at the back door. "Is something wrong, Wildfire?" he said tersely. "About 10 miles north, moving this way, the Henderson place could be in its path." Her hand flew to her mouth. "The children, Jim's riding over now to warn them, help them evacuate if necessary. I need to organize the men to protect the ranch and move the cattle to safer ground." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "If the wind shifts, we might need to evacuate as well. Start packing essentials: food, water, clothing, only what we can carry on horseback or fit in the wagon." The seriousness of his tone sent a chill through her despite the heat of the day. "What about the house? Everything you've built here?" Granger's jaw tightened. "Buildings can be rebuilt, land recovers, people don't." He turned to go, then hesitated. "Olivia, I need you to take charge of Tommy. Keep him calm, keep him safe." "Can you do that?" "Of course," she promised immediately. He held her gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them, then nodded and strode off toward the bunkhouse to alert the other ranch hands. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Donnelly and Olivia packed food, water, and essential items, while Tommy helped gather the ranch's important documents, deeds, financial records, and the few personal mementos Granger kept. Outside, the men worked to move the cattle away from the fire's potential path and create fire breaks around the main buildings. By late afternoon, a haze of smoke hung in the air and the smell of burning wood reached the ranch. Olivia found herself constantly checking the horizon, watching for the telltale glow of approaching flames. Tommy stayed close to her, his young face serious but determined as he helped with the preparations. As twilight fell, Jim Donnelly returned with news that the Hendersons were safe, having evacuated to Roswell with their livestock. The fire was still moving toward the Xavier ranch, but more slowly than feared. If the wind held steady, they might be spared the worst of it. Granger called everyone together in the main room to discuss their plans. "We've done what we can to protect the property," he told them, his face streaked with soot from the day's work. "Now we wait and watch. If the fire reaches that ridge," he pointed out the window to a line of hills about 3 miles distant, "we evacuate immediately, no arguments. Jim, Pete, and Cal will drive the remaining cattle south. Mrs. Donnelly, you'll take the wagon with our supplies. Tommy, you'll ride with Miss Byers." "What about you?" Olivia asked, suddenly afraid. "I'll be the last to leave, make sure everyone gets out safely," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. The night that followed was tense and sleepless. No one went to bed. Instead, they took turns watching from the porch while others tried to rest in chairs or on pallets on the floor. Olivia sat with Tommy, who eventually fell asleep with his head in her lap, despite the circumstances. She stroked his hair gently, her eyes frequently finding Granger, who stood at the window, a silhouette against the faint orange glow now visible in the northern sky. Around midnight, he came to sit beside her on the bench, his body radiating exhaustion. "You should try to sleep," he said quietly. "We may need to move quickly come dawn." "I don't think I could sleep if I tried," she admitted. "Besides, you're not sleeping either." A tired smile flickered across his face. "Fair point." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds Tommy's even breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. Finally, Granger spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about what matters, what I'd truly regret losing if the worst happens." Olivia turned to look at him, struck by the vulnerability in his expression. "And what did you conclude? That this land, these buildings, they're just things. Important, yes, but replaceable." His eyes met hers in the dim light. "It's the people that can't be replaced. Tommy, the Donnellys, you." Her heart quickened at the way he said that last word, "you," with a certain weight that suggested she had become more important to him than she had realized. "Granger," she began, but he shook his head slightly. "Not now. Not with everything hanging in the balance. But when this is over, if we're spared the worst of it, I'd like to talk about the future, your future, perhaps our future." Before she could respond, Pete burst through the door. "Winds shifted," he announced urgently. "Fire's changing direction, heading east now, away from us." Everyone was instantly alert, moving to windows and the porch to confirm the news. Sure enough, the orange glow on the horizon had moved, no longer directly north of the ranch, but angling away to the northeast. Granger went outside to confer with Jim and the other hands, returning after several minutes with cautious optimism. "It seems we may be spared," he told the assembled household. "The fire's moving away from us, but we'll maintain our watch through the night. Don't let down your guard just yet." A collective sigh of relief passed through the room. Mrs. Donnelly began preparing coffee for everyone, and Tommy, now awake, peppered Pete with questions about fighting wildfires. Olivia found herself standing alone by the window, watching the distant fire glow. She sensed rather than heard Granger approach to stand beside her. "What you said before," she began quietly, "about our future holds true," he interrupted gently. "But there will be time for that conversation when the danger has passed completely." She nodded, understanding his caution but impatient nonetheless to explore the possibility he had raised. Something had changed between them tonight, as if the threat of losing everything had stripped away the last barriers of reserve. By dawn, it was clear that the ranch had escaped the worst of the fire. The wind had continued to push the blaze eastward, away from both the Xavier property and the town of Roswell. Though the air remained hazy with smoke, and they would need to check for any spot fires that might have been started by flying embers, the immediate danger had passed. The household slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The packed supplies were unpacked, the cattle were guided back to their usual grazing areas, and everyone caught up on much-needed sleep. Olivia postponed the day's lessons, allowing Tommy and the Henderson children, who returned 2 days later, time to process the frightening experience. It was nearly a week before Granger finally approached her about the conversation they'd begun the night of the fire. He found her in the garden one evening, picking tomatoes for Mrs. Donnelly's supper plans. "Would you walk with me?" he asked, a certain formality in his tone that made her pulse quicken. She nodded, setting down her basket and brushing soil from her hands. He led her away from the house, toward a small rise that offered a view of much of the ranch property. The sun was beginning to set, painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. "I've been thinking about what I almost lost in that fire," Granger began as they stood side by side, looking out over the land. "Not just the ranch, but the chance to tell you something I should have said weeks ago." Olivia turned to face him, hardly daring to hope what that something might be. His expression was solemn but tender as he met her eyes. "When I saw you on that auction block, something inside me recognized you not as a face or a person I knew, but as a kindred spirit. Someone who had been judged unfairly, just as I had been." He took a deep breath. "I told myself I was only helping you because you needed help, that bringing you here was just about finding a teacher for Tommy. But the truth is, from that first day, there was something more." "For me as well," Olivia admitted softly, "though I tried to deny it, even to myself." Granger's expression lightened at her words. "I've grown to admire your strength, your intelligence, your kindness with the children. But more than that, I've grown to care for you in a way I never expected to care for anyone again after the war." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not a man of many words, Olivia, and I know this may seem sudden, but the fire made me realize that life is too unpredictable to waste time on hesitation. I love you. I want you to stay here not as an employee or because of that contract, but because you choose to, because perhaps you might feel something for me as well." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I do feel something for you, Granger. Something that has grown stronger each day I've been here. I love you too." The smile that broke across his face transformed him, erasing the lines of worry and reserve that usually marked his features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened as she responded with the feelings she had kept contained for so long. When they finally parted, Granger kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I know it's soon to ask, but would you consider becoming my wife, making this place your permanent home, helping me raise Tommy properly?" Olivia laughed softly, joyously. "It's not too soon at all. Yes, I would be honored to be your wife, to make a home with you and Tommy." As the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they both now considered home, Granger pulled her into another embrace. There was much still to discuss, plans to make, a future to build together. But for now, this moment of recognition and acceptance was enough. Two people once labeled and judged by others, now choosing to define themselves and their relationship on their own terms. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and to neighboring properties. Mrs. Donnelly was especially delighted, confessing that she had been hoping for this outcome since Granger first brought Olivia home from the auction. Tommy was equally enthusiastic, throwing his arms around Olivia and declaring that now she would be his real teacher. Forever, preparations for the wedding began immediately. Though both Olivia and Granger would have been content with a simple ceremony at the ranch, Mrs. Donnelly insisted that they do things properly, with a church wedding in Roswell and a celebration afterward. "It's high time people in town saw Mr. Xavier Granger as he truly is," she declared. "And what better occasion than his wedding day?" Despite his initial reluctance to make such a public statement, Granger eventually agreed, recognizing that if they were to build a life together in this community, they couldn't remain isolated at the ranch forever. The date was set for the first Saturday in August, giving them just over a month to prepare. Olivia found herself caught up in a flurry of activity she had never anticipated when she'd stood on that auction block just a few months earlier. Mrs. Donnelly helped her alter one of Granger's sister's finer dresses into a suitable wedding gown, while Granger rode to Roswell to arrange for the ceremony with the local minister and to order a proper gold band. During this busy time, Olivia continued teaching the children, though their lessons often included practical mathematics as they helped calculate quantities for the wedding feast or measured fabric for decorations. Tommy took his role as future stepson very seriously, often offering earnest advice about how to make Granger happy. "He likes his coffee real hot in the morning," the boy informed her solemnly one day as they worked on his reading, "and you shouldn't talk to him too much before he's had it." Olivia had to stifle a laugh. "I'll keep that in mind, Tommy. Any other advice?" Tommy considered seriously. "He has bad dreams sometimes, about the war, I think. He doesn't like to talk about them, but he's less grumpy the next day if someone sits with him for a while." This more sobering insight gave Olivia pause. She had suspected that Granger's experiences in the war still troubled him, but he rarely spoke of that time. She made a mental note to be patient and understanding when those darker moments came. As the wedding day approached, Olivia found herself reflecting on the remarkable turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a respected teacher in Boston. 3 months ago, a disgraced woman on an auction block. And now she was preparing to become the wife of a man she had come to love deeply, the stepmother to a bright boy who had stolen her heart, and the mistress of a ranch that had become more home to her than any place she'd known before. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the promise of August heat later in the day. Mrs. Donnelly had arranged for Olivia to stay at the Henderson farm the night before, adhering to the tradition that the groom shouldn't see the bride before the ceremony. Martha Henderson and her daughters helped Olivia dress in the altered gown, ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, modified to better suit the New Mexico climate and the relatively simple ceremony. Her dark hair was arranged in a neat coil at the nape of her neck, adorned with small white flowers from the garden. "You look beautiful," Martha said warmly, adjusting the small veil. "Granger Xavier is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Olivia replied honestly. 3 months ago, I had nothing, no home, no future, no hope. Now I have everything I could wish for." John Henderson drove them to town in the family wagon, the girls chattering excitedly about the celebration to follow. Roswell was busier than usual for a Saturday, with many of the local ranchers and townspeople gathered for the event. As the wagon pulled up to the small white church, Olivia saw familiar faces from neighboring properties, as well as curious townsfolk who had come to witness the marriage of the reclusive Granger Xavier to the mysterious Eastern woman who had appeared on his ranch. Jim Donnelly was waiting to escort her inside, having agreed to give her away in the absence of her father. As he offered his arm, he leaned close and whispered, "He's nervous as a cat, but happier than I've ever seen him. You've been good for him, Miss Byers, soon to be Mrs. Xavier." The church was simple but lovely, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons by Mrs. Donnelly and the Henderson girls. As Olivia entered on Jim's arm, the small gathering rose to their feet. Her eyes, however, were fixed only on Granger, who stood at the altar beside the minister. He was dressed in his best, a dark suit that he must have ordered specially for the occasion, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that caught at her heart, a look of such naked adoration and disbelief, as if he couldn't quite comprehend that this moment was real. Tommy stood proudly beside him as his best man, practically vibrating with excitement in his new suit. As Olivia approached, the boy gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up that made several of the guests chuckle softly. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When Granger slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his hand trembled slightly, and Olivia squeezed his fingers in reassurance. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride." Granger cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The small congregation erupted in applause, led by an enthusiastic Tommy. The celebration that followed, held in the garden of the town's small hotel, was more festive than Olivia had anticipated. It seemed that despite the whispers and rumors about Granger, many in the community held genuine respect for him and were pleased to see him find happiness. Several people approached to congratulate them, including the sheriff, who shook Granger's hand firmly and welcomed Olivia to Roswell. As the afternoon wore on, with food and drink flowing freely and even some dancing to the music provided by a local fiddler, Olivia found a moment to step aside with her new husband. "Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. Granger smiled, the unguarded smile she had come to treasure. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, drawing her close. "And you, any regrets about tying yourself to a rough rancher and his adopted boy?" "Not a single one," she replied honestly. "When I was standing on that auction block, I thought my life was over. I could never have imagined that it was actually just beginning." He kissed her again, a promise of the life they would build together. "The auction had you marked as damaged goods," he murmured against her lips, "but I knew better from the start." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the celebration, Granger and Olivia bid farewell to their guests and climbed into the wagon that would take them, along with Tommy, back to the ranch back home. Tommy, exhausted from the day's excitement, quickly fell asleep against Olivia's side as Granger guided the horses along the familiar road. "What are you thinking?" Granger asked, noticing her thoughtful expression in the fading light. "About how strange and wonderful life can be," she replied. "How the worst moment of my life led me to the best." She glanced down at the sleeping boy beside her, then back at the man she now called husband. "How three broken people found each other and made a family." Granger reached across to take her hand, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. "Not broken," he corrected gently. "Just waiting to be made whole again." As the wagon crested the rise that revealed the Xavier Ranch, now her home, too, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The labels that others had placed on them, damaged, dangerous, disgraced, had no power here. They had judged each other as they truly were and found not damage but strength, not danger but protection, not disgrace but dignity. In the soft glow of twilight, the ranch looked almost enchanted, a haven of peace in the wild New Mexico landscape. Tommy stirred against her side, blinking sleepily up at the familiar sight of home. "We're here," Granger announced unnecessarily, a note of pride and contentment in his voice as he guided the horses into the yard. "Yes," Olivia agreed, squeezing his hand. "We're home." The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the Xavier Ranch. Olivia settled into her roles as wife, stepmother, and teacher with a sense of purpose and fulfillment she had never expected to find after the disgrace that had sent her west. The schoolroom expanded as more families in the area sent their children to learn from the Eastern-educated Mrs. Xavier, as she was now known. Granger built a proper small schoolhouse adjacent to the main house to accommodate the growing number of students. Tommy thrived under their joint care, his natural intelligence flourishing with Olivia's guidance and Granger's steady support. By his 15th birthday, he was helping manage significant aspects of the ranch operations, showing a keen mind for business that complemented Granger's practical knowledge of cattle and land. The ranch itself prospered as well. With Olivia's organizational skills complementing Granger's hard work and vision, they were able to expand their holdings, purchase better breeding stock, and eventually become one of the most respected ranching operations in the territory. The whispers and suspicions that had once followed Granger in Roswell gradually faded as the community came to know him as a fair employer, a devoted husband, and a respected member of local society. 2 years after their wedding, Olivia gave birth to their first child, a son they named William James Xavier, after both their fathers. The baby's arrival further cemented their family unit, with Tommy taking his role as big brother very seriously. Watching Granger cradle their newborn son, his tough exterior melting completely as he whispered promises to the tiny infant, Olivia felt her heart could not possibly contain more love. When William was 3, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, whose arrival completed their family circle. With her father's green eyes and her mother's dark hair, she quickly became the darling of the ranch, winning over even the most grizzled of the ranch hands with her bright smile and determined spirit. Life was not without its difficulties. There were harsh winters when the cattle suffered, dry seasons when they feared for their crops and water supply, occasional conflicts with rustlers or land speculators as the territory grew more populated. Granger still sometimes had nightmares about the war, nights when Olivia would simply hold him until the demons retreated. She, too, had moments when the memory of her disgrace in Boston would resurface, bringing with it echoes of shame that Granger would gently but firmly dispel. Through it all, they faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. The contract that had once bound Olivia as an indentured servant had long since been nullified. Granger had seen to that legally within months of their marriage, but a different kind of contract had taken its place. The voluntary bonds of love, respect, and shared purpose. On their 10th wedding anniversary, after the children had been put to bed and they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge in the New Mexico sky, Granger presented Olivia with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it," he urged with an enigmatic smile. Inside, she found a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Unfolding it carefully, she recognized it immediately: her original indenture contract, the document that had marked her as damaged goods and brought her to the auction block where Granger had found her. "I thought this was destroyed years ago," she said, looking up at him in confusion. "I kept it," he admitted, "not to hold over you, but as a reminder." "Of what?" "Of how close I came to missing you entirely." He took the paper from her hands and tore it in half, then in quarters, the sound sharp in the quiet evening. "And of how meaningless such judgments truly are. You were never damaged, Olivia. You were always exactly the person I needed, long before I knew to look for you." She leaned into his embrace, resting her head against his shoulder as they had done countless times over the years. "We saved each other, I think." "That we did, Mrs. Xavier, that we did." Far from the Boston society that had cast her out and the auction block that had labeled her as less than worthy, Olivia had found not just survival but true prosperity of spirit. The journey that had begun in humiliation had led to the deepest joy she could imagine. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, the ranch quiet around them and their children sleeping safely inside, Olivia reflected that sometimes the most damaged paths led to the most beautiful destinations. She and Granger had walked that path together, healing each other's wounds along the way, building a life that neither could have imagined when they first met. She, standing bound on an auction block, and he, a solitary rancher who had dared to look beyond a cruel label to see the woman beneath. "I love you, Granger Xavier," she whispered, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. "And I love you," he replied, his voice still carrying that note of wonder that she had chosen him, that they had found each other against all odds. Above them, the stars of the New Mexico night blazed in silent witness to a love that had transformed two wounded souls into something whole, and enduring a love that had begun with a simple declaration at an auction so many years before. The auction had her marked as damaged goods, but I'll be the judge of that. Granger had judged and found not damage but perfection, not in the conventional sense, but in the way they fit together, healed together, and built a life together that neither could have crafted alone. And that, Olivia thought as she turned her face up to meet her husband's kiss, was the greatest blessing of all.